The last thing I remember before everything changed was Liam's nervous laughter as he gripped the steering wheel too tightly. We were driving home from Westfield High on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other, until it wasn't. "Mom's going to kill me if I don't get that Goldman Sachs internship," he was saying, his knuckles white against the leather. "You know how she gets about my future." I had my earbuds in, only half listening to another one of his anxious rants about living up to our parents' impossible expectations. At 17, I'd learned to tune out the constant pressure they placed on their golden boy. It was easier than acknowledging how differently they treated us. The screech of tires cut through my music like a blade. Time fractured. The steering wheel spun violently in Liam's hands. I felt the sickening lurch as our car careened off the road, the world tilting sideways in a symphony of shattering glass and twisting metal. Pain exploded through my torso like lightning, and then, darkness. When consciousness finally crawled back to me 3 days later, I wasn't greeted by tearful parents or worried faces. Instead, harsh fluorescent lights burned my retinas, and the sharp smell of hospital disinfectant filled my nostrils. My body felt wrong, hollow in places it shouldn't be, held together by what felt like rough thread and desperate hope. The first face I saw wasn't my mother's or father's. It was a tired-looking nurse with kind eyes who noticed me stirring and immediately pressed a call button. "She's awake," the nurse announced to someone beyond my field of vision. That's when my parents appeared, stepping into view like actors reluctantly taking the stage. But there was no relief in their faces, no tears of joy, no rushed embraces. My mother looked at me with the same expression she wore when dealing with a broken appliance, annoyed at the inconvenience. "Finally," she said, not to me, but to the doctor who had appeared beside her. "How long until she can be discharged?" The doctor, a middle-aged man with gentle features that seemed at odds with the sterile environment, looked at me with genuine concern. "You've been through major trauma," he explained, his voice carefully professional. "The accident caused severe internal injuries. We had to remove your left kidney, but you're stable now. You're going to be just fine." I tried to speak, to ask about Liam, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The nurse, whose name tag read Sarah, offered me ice chips with a reassuring smile. "Liam?" I finally croaked. "Your brother walked away with minor cuts and bruises," my father answered, his tone flat. "He's already back at school. You, however, will be here for at least 2 weeks. There was no concern in his voice, no acknowledgement of how close they'd come to losing their daughter, just irritation at the disruption to their perfectly ordered lives. Over the next week, I began to understand the true depth of my family's indifference. Liam never visited, not once. My parents came by only when hospital protocol required it, sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chairs like they were fulfilling a tedious obligation. They spoke about me, not to me, discussing my condition with doctors as if I were unconscious. But it was during the 8th night of my recovery that I discovered something far worse than neglect. I'd been having trouble sleeping. The pain medication made me drowsy but never quite unconscious, leaving me in a twilight state between waking and dreams. It was nearly midnight when I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside my room, my parents, speaking in urgent whispers with someone I couldn't identify. "So theoretically," my mother was saying, her voice carefully controlled, "if we were to donate her remaining kidney to Liam, what would that mean for her prognosis?" My blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Patterson," came the shocked voice of what I now realized was Dr. Martinez, my surgeon. "Are you asking me to remove your daughter's only functioning kidney? She's already damaged." My father's voice cut in. "She'll never be able to live a full life anyway. But Liam, he has potential. He has a future. She's just taking up space." "This is insane," Dr. Martinez said, his professional composure cracking. "You're talking about killing your daughter. She'd be doing something meaningful for once." My mother replied coldly, "Instead of just being a burden." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. My own parents, the people who were supposed to protect me above all else, were calmly discussing ending my life as if they were deciding whether to trade in an old car. "I won't even consider this," Dr. Martinez said firmly, "and I'm obligated to report this conversation." "You'll do no such thing," my father snapped. "This is a private family matter. This is attempted murder," the doctor shot back. Their voices faded as they moved further down the hall, but the damage was done. I lay in that narrow hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, as the full weight of their betrayal crushed down on me. I had always known I was less important to them than Liam, but I never imagined they'd be willing to sacrifice my life for his convenience. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. I would survive, and I would make sure they never forgot what they'd tried to do. The next morning, I asked Sarah if I could speak to a social worker. Something in my voice must have alarmed her because within an hour, I was sitting across from Judith Reeves, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much but still held compassion. I told her everything, every word I'd overheard, every dismissive comment, every moment of callous indifference. Judith listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "You understand the seriousness of what you're telling me?" she asked when I finished. "I understand that my parents tried to kill me," I replied, "and I understand that I need protection." Within 24 hours, everything changed. A protective order was placed on my room. My parents were barred from making any medical decisions on my behalf. The hospital's security footage and audio systems had captured enough of their conversation to support my claims, and Child Protective Services launched an immediate investigation. When my parents discovered what had happened, they exploded. They stormed into the hospital demanding access to their property, screaming about ungrateful children and manipulative social workers. Security escorted them out while I watched from my window, feeling something I'd never experienced before: complete freedom from their toxic control. The legal proceedings moved quickly. 3 days before my 18th birthday, I was granted emancipation and placed in temporary foster care. My parents contested it, of course, but the recorded evidence was damning. The judge who granted my petition looked at me with something I'd rarely seen from adults in my life: respect. "You've shown remarkable courage," she told me. "Now use that strength to build the life you deserve." I was discharged into the care of Margaret Chin, a retired teacher who specialized in helping teens transition to independence. Her small apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, and safety, I'd learned, was everything. I threw myself into rebuilding my life with the same intensity my parents had once demanded from Liam. I finished high school online while working nights at a local bookstore, saving every penny. When social services offered college assistance, I politely declined. I wanted nothing that came with strings attached. At 19, I legally changed my name from Jessica Patterson to Claire Olin, taking my great-grandmother's maiden name. Jessica had been their daughter, the girl they'd tried to sacrifice. Claire was mine, strong, independent, and owing nothing to anyone. I started at the bottom of a small healthcare technology startup, making coffee and filing papers. But I had something my privileged upbringing had never taught me: hunger. Real, desperate hunger for success that came from knowing what it felt like to have nothing and no one. Within 6 months, I was promoted to administrative assistant. A year later, I was coordinating between departments. By my 22nd birthday, I was head of operations, and when the company expanded rapidly and needed new leadership, I convinced them to let me buy in as a partner. TechMed Solutions grew from a 12-person startup to a major player in healthcare software. We developed systems that protected patient rights, created oversight protocols for medical decisions, and built safeguards against the kind of abuse I'd experienced. Every day, I was helping ensure that no other teenager would face what I had in that hospital room. By 24, I was the youngest female executive in our industry. I had a corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, more money than I'd ever dreamed of, and the respect of colleagues who had no idea what I'd survived to get there. That's when fate decided to make things interesting. I was reviewing resumes for a new senior analyst position when a familiar name jumped out at me: Liam Patterson. My brother, the golden boy whose future my parents had valued more than my life, was applying to work for the company I'd built. His resume was mediocre at best: average grades from a decent college, a few uninspiring internships, and job experience that screamed entitled but underachieving. He had no idea who Claire Olin was, no idea that the sister he'd probably assumed was dead or forgotten had risen from the ashes of their betrayal. I scheduled him for an in-person interview. The day Liam walked into our executive conference room, his confident smile faltered the moment he saw me sitting at the head of the polished mahogany table. The blood drained from his face as recognition dawned. "You," he whispered, gripping the back of a chair for support. You're alive." "Disappointed?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm as I gestured for him to sit. "Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss." He stumbled into the chair across from me, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the awards on the walls, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, the obvious symbols of success and power. "You're the COO," he said, his voice cracking like he was 17 again. "I prefer Claire Olin, CEO and co-founder," I corrected. "You might remember me as Jessica, the sister whose organs you and our parents thought would be better used elsewhere." Liam's face went white. I wasn't part of that decision." "No," I agreed, leaning back in my leather chair. "You were just the beneficiary. Tell me, Liam, when I disappeared from your life, did you wonder where I went? Did you ask questions? Or did you simply accept that the inconvenient sister was finally out of the way? He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to form words. I've read your resume, I continued, tapping the papers in front of me. It's underwhelming. 5 jobs in 3 years, mediocre performance reviews, and a recommendation letter that damns you with faint praise. What exactly makes you think you're qualified to work for my company? I need this job, he said desperately. Things have been difficult. Difficult how? Mom and Dad, they're struggling financially. The medical bills from your accident, legal fees from when you. He trailed off, realizing what he was saying. From when I what? Refused to let them murder me? It wasn't murder, he protested weakly. I leaned forward, my voice deadly quiet. They asked a doctor to remove my only remaining kidney so you could have it. What would you call it? Silence filled the room like a toxic cloud. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing and walking to the window. You're going to leave this building and never apply to another position here. You're also going to go home and tell our parents that their useless daughter is alive, successful, and completely beyond their reach. Please, Liam begged. I'm sorry about what happened. We were all in shock, scared. I turned to face him, and something in my expression made him shrink back in his chair. You want to know what scared looks like? It's a 17-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed, listening to her parents plan her execution. It's realizing that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally see you as spare parts for their favorite child. You're ruining my life, he said, his face flushing with anger. No, Liam, I'm protecting it. You see, I built something here, a company that values human dignity, that protects people from exactly the kind of abuse our family subjected me to. Hiring you would be a betrayal of everything I stand for. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You always were bitter and vindictive, and you were always mediocre. I replied pleasantly. The difference is, I've overcome my challenges. You've simply been coasting on privilege that no longer exists. After he stormed out, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the city lights twinkle below. Then I picked up my phone and called our head of security. I need you to flag a name in our system, I said. Liam Patterson. He's banned from all our properties, and I want our partner companies notified as well. That evening, I went home to my modest but comfortable apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. I didn't need a mansion or flashy displays of wealth. I had something more valuable, the knowledge that I had survived, thrived, and built a life that served a purpose beyond myself. A week later, I received a letter with no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Inside was a desperate plea for financial help. They were losing their house, drowning in debt, and Liam couldn't find work anywhere in the industry. I wrote back a single sentence. You made your choice in that hospital. Live with it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment when I was barely conscious, tubes keeping me alive, and heard my mother ask a doctor to sacrifice me for my brother's benefit. They thought that was the end of my story, the moment when their unwanted daughter would finally serve a useful purpose. They had no idea it was actually the beginning. The beginning of a life lived entirely on my own terms, free from people who saw me as disposable. The beginning of a career dedicated to protecting others from the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. And most importantly, the beginning of understanding my own worth, something no one could ever take away from me again. Today, TechMed Solutions employs over 200 people and has helped implement patient protection protocols in hospitals across the country. We've prevented countless cases of medical abuse and empowered patients to make their own healthcare decisions. But the achievement I'm most proud of isn't visible on any corporate website or annual report. It's the fact that I took the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into the foundation for a life of purpose, success, and genuine happiness. My parents tried to end my story before it really began. Instead, they just gave me the perfect opening chapter.